Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay
This
Moore.
is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Marotta.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
This is Chuck Holton, and you're watching the Break It Down Show.
And now, the Break It Down Show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
Hey Chuck, I can do an intro on you, but why don't you just tell us where you're at, and we'll get started real fast here.
I'm in downtown Kyiv at the moment. The sun is just coming up on the 25th of February.
So you are in the middle of it. Ukraine, especially the town of Kyiv, has seen direct action. I guess what we've heard a lot in the mainstream media and all that kind of stuff, and they do their best to hear. Let's hear it from you. You're the guy that's there.
There has been some sporadic action over Kyiv today. So far, starting about 4 o'clock this morning, there were 2 cruise missiles that came over. Now, we had been warned last night that the Russians were going to start shelling Kyiv and an aerial bombardment at about 3 a.m. Fortunately, that didn't happen. And about 4:22, I think, is when those 2 cruise missiles came over. They were promptly shot down and crashed into a 9-story apartment building. There were some injuries from that, but not too many. 3, I think, just 3 injuries.
That's good news.
So, yeah. And I was just trying to take a nap a minute ago. We just finished our last hit for Newsmax. We've been going live like twice every hour all night long. So here it is, I don't know, 6 o'clock in the morning or something, 7 o'clock in the morning. And I was trying to lay down for a minute, and wouldn't you know it, aircraft started going overhead. You heard the anti-aircraft missiles firing at it, and you heard a couple of booms for whether it shot it down. I haven't heard yet. I'm sure that my phone is blowing up. I just haven't looked at it.
You used to be a Ranger back in the old days. I know from
100 years ago.
Yeah, but still, no man. You know with this stuff. Look, you'll get this. Another combat guy. When you hear outgoing, incoming crew, like you can kind of sort out what is what. How would you say? How does it sound to you?
It sounds like the Ukrainians are actually putting up a pretty good fight. Okay. Now, we've actually heard very little, and I get frustrated when I hear news personalities. I'm not going to name names or networks. It's certain networks who are, they'll stand up there and they say, "We heard several large bangs, and they were loud, and they were louder than the last bangs we heard." I mean, that doesn't tell the viewer anything. Right. Somebody could have slammed a car door. They don't know.
And again, the difference between something going out after a cruise, something to shoot down a cruise missile or, counter battery, these things have a different sound. And so if you're not educated, it is hard to know what's going on because it can be a lot. And then also small arms fire, what direction that's like, that's understand that stuff.
Very
and
true.
If you're saying that it's not what we're hearing on the news, I want to hear more about that.
Yeah, I mean, it is in Kyiv so far. There's not been a lot of fighting, but it is progressed to within about 20 kilometers of the city. The Russians are, I would say, getting more resistance than they expected. Part of the reason that they're not moving as fast as they might have wanted to is because of the many Javelin missiles that the United States gave to the Ukrainians, and they're making very good use of those things. They've taken out something like almost 60 Russian tanks just yesterday. Wow. And that's expensive.
Yeah.
So there've been conflicting numbers on the amount of Russian troops killed. You can usually expect that the numbers coming out of the opposite side will be inflated, and of the Russian side will be underreported. So from the Ukrainian or from the Ukrainian side, I heard somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 and something from the president's military attaché last night. The Pentagon, somebody from the Pentagon was tweeting that Ukrainians had killed 800 Russian troops. I have no idea where they got that number. That's probably not accurate. And the Russians have said something like 57. So there you go. That's the way it always goes with these things. The thing is, a lot of journalists want to come and cover a conflict like this, such a big deal, but they aren't very well versed in the arcane terminology of the military, in things like you're talking about, the difference between outgoing and incoming fire. What does close fire sound like, and what does far away fire sound like? I heard a journalist reporting that we heard a loud bang and it sounded very close. Well, I looked it up and it was about 10 miles away.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't know the difference between a shotgun going off next door and a cruise missile going off 20 kilometers from here. So having that military experience, I think, lets me bring something to the table that other journalists might not have. Of course, getting a BRDM reported as a tank, and a armored personnel carrier reported as a tank, and a 6-ton truck reported as a tank, and a bulldozer reported as a tank, and a Lada reported as a tank. That happens in every conflict as well. And those are the kinds of things that sort of make me roll my eyes and just go I realize that a lot of people that are listening, a lot of the viewers, if you were never in the military, you're not going to get the distinctions between those kinds of things either. However, there's air raid sirens going off. So can you, I don't know if you can hear that.
I can. I can.
I'm going to open the window a little bit.
Very, very faint, but I can hear it.
Okay, I just opened the window. You should be able to hear it a little more. Tell you what, I'm going to pick my laptop up.
Yeah.
And I'm going to show you out because we may see something explode here in a minute.
This is live video from Ukraine. Chuck Holton reporting. Air raid sirens going off.
Chuck, this is perfect time to ask this. The media is reporting, and I think the Russians have as well, that they've just completely destroyed the Ukrainian air defenses. Are you seeing that?
No, I'm seeing the opposite. The Ukrainian air defenses are taking out just about everything the Russians send over here.
Okay. My other question for you, obviously the Ukrainian military is putting up much more of a fight than I expected. I think than anybody really expected. Although I think I could be wrong. I think the conventional fight is more or less a foregone conclusion. It just may take more time and cost more than the Russians had hoped.
Right. But
what is the feeling on the ground? What are the Ukrainian people? Where are they at on this? They appear to be, from the reports that I've seen, and again, like you say, those are take it for what it's worth. But they appear to be pretty incensed and pretty willing to fight.
Oh, yeah. That is the difference between the Ukrainians and the Afghans, for sure. The Ukrainians are absolutely committed to their country. They know, by and large, they know what the horrors of communism. Many of their grandparents and great-grandparents lived through the Holodomor, which you don't learn a lot about in the United States, but it was a Holocaust practically that was perpetrated on the Ukrainian people by the Russians, where they came in the early 1930s and literally just took all of their food and left them for the winter with no food and starved about, something like 2 million people. So they remember that, and they don't want to go back to that. They enjoy their freedom. And they don't buy this ridiculous ninth grade history teacher gig that Vladimir Putin has been engaging in, trying to convince the world that Ukraine is actually Russia. It's just forgot, or it just doesn't realize it. And I think the perfect word picture to describe this situation is that the Putin is the jilted ex-boyfriend that is just can't let go, and he's stalking his ex-girlfriend all over the place. And well, she's welcome to date whoever she wants as long as it's me, as long as it's not anybody else. And as soon as she starts courting somebody else, he comes over and bangs on the window until she calls 911. In this case, that's NATO. And 911 says, sorry, it's not much we can do for you. We'll send you some ammunition and you take care of it. So the Ukrainians, by and large, are, and they don't have the same military that they had in 2014. They have dramatically increased the strength of their military, the size of their military. They're making a big deal about the fact that Russia has 200,000 troops surrounding the country, and that is a big deal. But the Ukrainians have 250,000 troops between active and reserves. And I asked the military attaché last night how many, because they just announced a general mobilization. Every military age male and anybody else who wants to pick up a gun can come down to the corner and pick one up from the government and get an AK-47 and go shoot the enemy in the face. And I asked him, how many of those people do you have? And he said, about 5 million.
Yeah.
So the Russians have lots of armor. They got airplanes, they got cruise missiles, they got bombs, they got drones. But the one thing they don't have is want to. And this is what we're seeing. The Russian troops that are being captured, and there's been a surprising number of them, one entire platoon surrendered. It was a recon platoon. And they're saying, we were told we were coming over here on training missions. We weren't told we were coming over to kill people. Or I was told I was coming to escort some people out of here or something. I didn't know this was even an invasion. Like, I didn't know what was going on. Remember, the Russian military is a conscript army. Their morale is low. And I'm not saying that they're going to lose this fight. I'm saying, stranger things have happened. Israel is a good example. And I think that given the right set of circumstances, they could bloody Putin's nose enough that he might change his mind and decide to be happy with, what he's got down in Donbass or whatever. But the bottom line is these people are fierce and they're ready. And there are two groups of people in Ukraine. There are the infirm, elderly, and young, and those kind of people who are now looking for an exit strategy, their families are looking to send them out of here, send them off west. Some absolutely heartbreaking images coming out of the train station where you see fathers putting their little girls on the train and just crying into their, as they hug and kiss them goodbye. And then the father bucks up and turns around and goes off to war. We passed an armored column yesterday that was a very large Ukrainian armored column that was headed into the fight in Kyiv. And watching those boys on top of those tanks, they looked grim, but they looked confident. And I think that Putin may have overstretched his hand here.
I want to ask you about that too, because you don't go invade a country unless you're confident you're going to win. And, you're going to have sanctions thrown against you. You figured out how to deal with that, or you're willing to accept the consequence. But those young fellas on that armored column sitting on top of the tank, grim, steel-chinned. But again, you got that Ranger background. What do you see when you see those guys?
I see guys that are competent, that are ready to go deal and know that there's a good likelihood they're not going to come back, but they've got a job to do and they know it's their job to do. This is the difference between them, again, and the Afghans. The Afghans immediately dropped everything and ran to the airport and begged to get on the airplane to come to the United States. What we should have done is put some of those $86 billion worth of weapons that we left there in their hands, turned them around and said, go fight for your country. We didn't owe those people anything. They owed us something. That's my opinion on it. And the Ukrainians are very grateful for the help that they've gotten in the form of Javelin missiles and things like that from the United States, but they don't expect the U.S. to come do their fighting for them. They're ready to do their fighting. And it's not just the military, it's everybody. You see grandmothers that say, I'm going to go kick some ass. It's the kind of homogeneity that I wish we had in the United States. We probably did have at one time, maybe back in the 1940s, but we don't have anymore.
Yeah. The difference between there and here is we have a lot of polarization, and then also, the desire to actually go do this, to fight for your homeland. It's tough. It's different. But let's stay focused on Ukraine for a little bit longer. In the weeks leading up to this fight, how were the Ukrainians? I mean, obviously, you hope that doesn't come down to kind of armed conflict that we're at right now. But, you're sort of like, I don't know, you just kind of hope until the last moment that it doesn't happen. But now it has happened. So what were their bets going into this? Were they mostly positive? How were they? Were they resolved?
Good questions. I am frankly really surprised at the Ukrainians' reaction. I've been here for 3 weeks now. And for the first 2 weeks, everybody just went on with their lives. And you'd go like, do you know that there's 200,000 troops practically surrounding your country? And they'd go, yeah. They've been threatening us for 8 years. They really were kind of like, hey, Putin needs to just cook or get out of the kitchen. We're tired of him, pretending he's going to invade us. If he's going to do it, let him do it this time. And so I was really impressed by that. Even as late as yesterday morning, after bombs had started falling, people were still out walking their dogs and doing everyday life things here in Kyiv. But when we went to the outskirts of the city yesterday, there were a lot of people leaving. I mean, there was like a 200-mile backup of cars getting out of the city. That said, I'm really kind of shocked at how ill-prepared they are for this. It's like they just could not bring themselves to believe that it would actually ever happen. And so now, actually, we just had a Ukrainian girl that we've been working with here that's been helping set things up. And when the cruise missile got shot down earlier this morning, it actually landed pretty close to her house, and she was really scared. And she's texting us and saying, we don't know what to do. We don't know where to go. We don't have anything planned. We probably should have a plan for what to do here. And we should have been prepared. And I'm thinking, yeah, for 8 years, you had this sword of Damocles hanging over your head, and you didn't even think about what you might do. I mean, and there was panic buying yesterday everywhere in the grocery stores. ATMs machines were, an hour to get to the ATM at gas stations, everything. And you're like, did you guys not hear the news for the last 3 weeks? Like, you might have filled up your gas tank before today. But I'm sure it would be the same in the States if we had that. Yeah. People just find it hard to believe.
There was, I know there was a lot of messaging from the Ukrainian government that early on, as the crisis started to unfold, that, it isn't that serious. They're not going to invade, that kind of thing. How much of an effect did that have on the civilian preparedness? I would like to think that if I got 200,000 troops massing on my border, like I say, I'm gassing up the tank, I'm getting some food together, I've got my bug out bag ready. I don't care what the government's telling me.
Right. Except it's really fascinating to me. I'm a real student of culture. As somebody who goes to 20, 25 countries a year, and I love languages, I love world religions, and I love to study the effects of people's worldviews on their culture. You can see some very interesting things about the post-Soviet countries. And one of them is that, one of them is that they expect the government to do a lot, but yet at the same time, they have fully embraced I've got something in my throat. They have fully embraced the Americanism, what they think is Americanism. So I'll give you an example. I got asked this several years ago on a different trip to Ukraine. I got asked to speak at a youth camp, and it was a Christian youth camp that asked me to come and talk to their kids. And I said, okay. So I went and I said, what do you want me to talk about? And the pastor that was in charge of the thing said, well, I want you to talk about modesty, because we have a real problem. I mean, he said, Ukraine lost like millions of people in World War II. And so there was like 3 women for every man. And so the culture has sort of evolved so women just have to really shake what mama gave them if they want to get a mate. And so we have a real problem with immodesty. And I said, well, I've got a couple of daughters. I know I can talk about that. So I gave this little talk on modesty. Hey, girls, truth in advertising, you want to be seen as a human being, then your leg should not be the first thing that people notice about you, whatever. But the girls came up to me afterwards and they said, how can you talk to us about the modesty when all we're doing is dressing like American girls? Yeah. Now, at that time, there was like this fad where these girls would wrap saran wrap around their chest with no bra, and that was their shirt, right? And I was like, American girls don't dress like that. And they said, yes, they do. We watch MTV. So their idea of American culture was what they see on MTV, right? And so they have a very skewed idea, but they have fully embraced what they think is American culture, and it may or may not be. So extrapolate that to the militia culture that they have here. There's a huge militia culture in Ukraine. There's a huge tactical gear industry, and everywhere you go, you see guys dressed like 3%ers everywhere, right? And actually, they got really good gear. I mean, the stuff that's made here in Ukraine is really good stuff. It's better than 511 or a lot of American brands. But so they have fully embraced that, partially because they think that they emulate that about America, I think. But also a lot of men here realize that it may come to what we see right now. For the last 8 years, they've been looking at this, angry ex-boyfriend across the border here, one of the world's superpowers, and they've been saying, man, this could get ugly. Yeah. So I think that's a really fascinating facet of this whole thing, and it extends even to old ladies and kids and everything. I talked to a girl that was our waitress here at the hotel the other day and asked her what she was going to do, and she said, "I'm going to go fight."
Look out! Look out! Yeah. When all the cars are pointed in one direction, headed out of town, it's hard to move things. And you and I both know, you get into a firefight with 7 magazines of ammo, all of a sudden you're like, I don't got enough ammo. It's really easy. So do you see the Ukrainian government being able to, okay, great, you can come by and grab a rifle, but I'm going to need 3,000 rounds and I'll be back tomorrow for another 3. That gets expensive too. I mean, you know how hard it is to come by rounds in the American Army.
Yeah, I mean, that's the real problem they have. He told me that last night. He said, we got 5 million people that would pick up guns tomorrow. We just don't have 5 million guns. And so that's our limiting factor this right now. They've been receiving a lot of materiel from Europe and the United States. Poland sent helmets, and Latvia sent, grenades and things like that. Some of the other Baltic states have given their entire stockpiles of Javelin missiles to Ukraine. And I think just like the Stinger missile made a decisive difference in Afghanistan against the Russians, the Javelin may end up being the thing that turns the tide here in Ukraine. Now, I asked the guy last night, do you think you guys can really win this? And he said, I think we can, but if we don't, then it's partisan war. They will never, until the last Russian is gone from this country, they will never stop fighting them. I mean, our people will will be out there hiding behind every tree till the last man. And I believe it. I mean, these people are serious. So, yeah, I mean, they need a lot more than they have for sure. But I almost am reticent to say this, but my thought has always been that we should not give weapons to anybody. I get it in this case. I get why we would do it and why we would want to. But see, that kind of military hardware is durable and fungible. And at some point in time in the future, it will be shooting back at us, whatever's left over. Imagine if we send all these Javelin missiles over here and then Russia takes this country successfully. We just gave Russia a whole, thousands of Javelin missiles. And what are they going to do with them? They're going to sell them to Libya or sell them to Colombia or someplace. And we're still getting shot at by American M16s from Vietnam across the border in Mexico now. So I've always said, if it's worth doing, if there's a military conflict out there that's worth getting involved in, then it ought to be worth sending our own sons and daughters to take care of the problem. And if it's not worth that, then maybe we shouldn't get involved to begin with.
And then
Yeah,
this is
the
a
next time we
legitimate point.
see a terrorist executing a line of people in their country, it won't be the first time you see them walk like they've been trained by special forces, do a Green Beret, because that, I mean, you and I both have seen video of that. You're like, that guy's been trained by an 18 something for sure. Yep. And it does come back to bite us. One of the questions I guess we have to talk about, someone already brought it up, is do you see this? Okay, so the Ukrainians, at least in Kyiv where you're at, it seems like for right now, they're kind of holding their own. If you put a hole in 60 tanks, it's going to give generals a pause before they keep coming in, especially if they're not even in town yet, right? Because that gets really nasty. You want to talk about tanks dying? Holy cow! You'll just block the whole town up. Do you see this escalating in terms of munitions and getting anything NBC related at all? NBC
related or CBRNE related? I really doubt it.
Okay.
Now, it seems that what they're doing now, that their tactics are to bypass major population centers and then encircle them and then give them an ultimatum and say, give up or we're going to bomb you to kingdom come. That's what happened in Sumy out in the east, and it's still going on. That battle's still going on. It happened in Kherson last night. They bypassed it and ended up sort of surrounding it. And they're attempting to do that right now in Kyiv. So we've got these guys coming down that are about 25 kilometers from where I'm sitting. The Russians are up here in the north, and they've been pushing down, but getting a lot of actual combat along the way. But the tanks from the east now are pushing to try to encircle Kyiv, and that's the real concern. They encircle Kyiv and then give an ultimatum. You got to wonder what's the end game here. Is Putin trying to just absorb this into Russia, or is he just trying to topple this regime and put in place a new regime that will be friendly toward Russia, a puppet regime like they had with the previous president before the Maidan Square stuff back in 2014? That's what kicked off the whole Maidan revolution. Now they call it the Revolution of Dignity. That's what kicked that whole thing off, was that there was a puppet president in here that was pro-Putin. The people were not, and he kept voting against the will of the people, and they rose up and threw him out. So I kind of wonder if Putin is not going to try to do that again. It seems like that would be, he's painted this as I'm the savior of Ukraine. Ukraine needs to be saved from itself because it's being manipulated by the West and it doesn't realize it. And so they need us to come in there and kill a bunch of them and save them from that. I mean, what a madman! What an absolute madman! To think that you can actually convince yourself you've got some kind of moral high ground in this conflict. Are you kidding me? Right? But that's really what he believes. I'm sure he's convinced himself of that.
Pat, you got a question?
Yeah. So let's say, for the sake of argument, this is a hypothetical, but let's say, for the sake of argument, Putin gets it done, takes Ukraine. I have no confidence that sanctions are going to, in a month or so, are going to do anything. If he takes the country, consolidates his gains, he's here to stay.
Yeah, it'll be a long time to kick him out.
So
And
what's
it'll be-
his next move? Is he crazy enough to think that he can take on NATO?
I think that there is absolutely no doubt that what Putin is doing right now is a perfect and exact measure of his understanding of the weakness of the United States. I said back in August that August 28th to 2021 will likely go down in the history books as the day America lost its superpower status. And I think that that has been borne out in my experience since then. I spent a month in Syria back in November, and I watched Turkey and Russia and ISIS and the United States and everybody sort of squabbling over the land there. There's no doubt that our adversaries have been highly animated and motivated by and encouraged by the weakness being shown by the U.S. president. And there's no doubt that our allies have been very discouraged by the same weakness. So the fact that he thinks he can get away with, doing something that hasn't been done in Europe since the 1940s is a perfect picture of the disdain and disrespect that he holds for the U.S. president that's sitting in the White House right now.
I know we're bad at history, but you and I, again, we both know this crew of people who are running the United States government, and they can take this criticism because they want the damn job. So here it comes. They have fucked up over and over and over again. The withdrawal from Iraq, same excuse for Afghanistan. Oh, there was already a deal in place. We couldn't improve it. Same failures over and over again. The Arab Spring, Syria, Libya, on and on and on and on. This crew of people have been wrong nonstop.
Right.
And you look at the Iranian escalation of what they were doing, and this is not an endorsement of Donald Trump, but when he said, "Hey, knock it off," or "I'm going to do something," and then they didn't knock it off, and he did something, Iran had to back up and lick its wounds and figure out what they were going to do. What they weren't going to do was attack American forces on any kind of large scale. So we've not seen that with President Biden. We've not seen that when those same people were advising him and he was working with President Obama. And we're going to give a shot at George Bush as well, because also not a great track record on these things. So let's be fair there. But there is a weakness, and does this get worse from other places? I mean, obviously we have to look at China. We can't even talk about China in the press conference today, right?
Right. Yeah, no, I think that we are going to continue to see this. We're going to see it in Iran. We're going to see it in Iraq. We're going to see it in Syria. It was definitely happening with Turkey. All of these adversary countries, maybe not even enemy countries, just adversary countries, are seeing that the United States is in decline. And they realize that it really doesn't matter what we think anymore, because they can just, and they're emboldened to do their own thing. Now they understand that we change our regime every 4 years. So they understand that this particular regime is their chance. They don't know what the next one's going to be like, but they're getting while they're getting's good. And again, we're seeing lots and lots of human suffering around the world because of it, whether that's Venezuela and what they're doing with Iran and China, Cuba. I mean, you could go on and on and on with how even the immigration crisis, how these immigrants are being weaponized country against country, because there's no cohesion, there's no cohesive direction with that, because everybody knows, well, the United States has thrown open the gates and they're just letting them all in. So
on the other side of that,
speaking of refugee crisis, we're about to see one of those right here in Ukraine. I'd say.
Yeah, and not a whole lot of room for anybody to take on a whole bunch of new people. The other thing on that side is the our partners and our allies. How much are they going to say? Well, I guess it's up to us, and then they start forming their own micro alliances, or they gear up and maybe they get a little bit aggressive because look, the Baltics aren't exactly comfortable with Russia on their flank, and then a little bit of Kaliningrad on the other side of them too, right? So I could see that also causing those things to heat up because they realize the big dog isn't going to fight because the big dog's old.
Well, and Belarus is highly motivated now because their big brother Russia is supporting them, but they have been dramatically increasing the weaponization of migrants. I was reporting on that last year and pushing them into Europe on purpose. It's the same. I mean, there are these common threads that you see around the world. You look at what China's doing, pumping fentanyl into the United States to intentionally kill American citizens and rot the American culture from the inside out to hasten the decline of the American people. And they realize, I mean, they killed 100,000 Americans last year with fentanyl. If they did that with tanks and guns, they would have a real problem. But they can do it with drugs and not so much. No big deal.
Pat?
Yeah. Mark Howell over here on the chat asked, and it was something that was in my mind as well. You think China's going to take the opportunity to take Taiwan? Now, my opinion is they're not going to do that right now. But should we get involved in a land war in Europe, I don't see them not taking a slap at Taiwan while we're distracted. Your opinion on that?
Yeah, I mean, look what China did in Hong Kong. Now they're doing it in Taiwan. That you could name any number of countries who are being brought under the ascendant umbrella of China. Even where I live in Panama, they have moved away from the United States and moved closer to Panama to the extent that they have even stopped recognizing Taiwan as a nation. And that is because of China's long-term goal to take over the world with a carrot and a stick. They bring the carrot to Panama and say, we'll give you $5 billion to build a new bridge over the canal and to build a railway and to, all these things. And that'll come due, at some point that'll come due around the world.
I'm always fascinated by the distance between places when you look at things like the distance between, I don't know, Kharkiv and Slovakia, 1,000 miles. It's not very far. That's by car.
Not much.
It's not far at all. So this thing can get out of hand real fast because, the gods of war, not only does the enemy get a vote, the gods of war really control everything. And the wrong person dies at the wrong moment for the dumbest reason and things flip.
Some dissident assassinates Archduke Ferdinand and you get, 16 million people killed or whatever in World War I. I mean, there are 1,000 different things that could happen tomorrow or today that we can't plan for or think of that could kick this thing off into a much broader conflict. And that's concerning. I mean, look at how Russia has been pushing out. They got involved in the Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict in the Nagorno-Karabakh, and as peacekeepers. But those peacekeepers didn't bother to show up, when the war first started, where they could have come right in immediately and put a stop to it. But they waited until Armenia was literally on its back, about to get overrun completely, and then came in and made. But guess who was selling the weapons to Azerbaijan that they were using to do it? Russia, right? So they were playing both sides of that fence. Now they've just recently gone into Kazakhstan, and again, peacekeepers, right? And now that's what they did in the Donbass. We're here as peacekeepers, and they're probably going to say the same thing if they end up successfully taking Ukraine. They're spinning this, they're spinning it, and I wonder if at some point the tail starts to wag the dog, I mean, they get too far out over their skis. I'm hoping that that's already happened, but it remains to be seen. But they've worked very hard over the last 8 years to insulate themselves from the sanctions that we're putting on them. I was here in 2014 during the Dignity Revolution, and I reported then that Russia had $200 billion of U.S. currency in petrodollars, and if they were to divest themselves of that, it would dramatically reduce our leverage against Russia. Well, that's exactly what they did. And now they've got 166 billion ounces of gold. And they, if you've been watching the price of gold, it's up over $100 an ounce since this conflict started. Probably went up $100 yesterday. I haven't looked, but Russia has made so much money on the increase in their gold hoard just because of this conflict. And some people say they're making an extra $1 billion a day in gas as oil prices go up because of this conflict. So it's like they shorted the market and then blew up the World Trade Center. They saw this coming. They knew what they were going to do, and they arranged everything beforehand. So they may end up profiting from all these sanctions. The West is essentially toothless against them.
This evening, when President Biden was speaking, he said that they didn't go with the full package of financial constraints that they wanted to. He indicated that Europe was not for that plan. Do you have any thoughts on the control of the market and okay, granted we shut off stuff in America, but there was a more rigorous option that we could have taken, and he's saying that Europe didn't want that.
I don't get it.
Okay.
So Europe, who can understand Europe? I mean, who can understand the United States military leaders who are insistent that climate change is our biggest enemy, for Pete's sake.
Yeah.
In the face of this, in the face of what we're seeing right here, and climate change is our biggest enemy. And Mitt Romney was mocked for saying that Russia was an important risk to threat to America's national security. And here we are. You've got these big brain bureaucrats who are, these people have spent so much time studying their navel, they can't remember how to wipe their ass.
Yeah.
And it's like, how do we,
yeah. I'll just say this right.
They say in West Virginia, they're about as smart as a rooster with socks on.
Yeah.
And
well, look, and let's be honest. We'll go back for the top because they wanted the job, so they get the hammer. You, me, and Blinken, we all go out. We go to work, doing real work in real dangerous places, and we'll see which guy gives up first. It ain't going to be you and me.
That's right.
When you have to eat medium rare pork on some pork farmer's yard, and you're having to do all the stuff that you have to do to understand how to get his vision done, it's bullshit. He doesn't know
it is.
Soccer.
And you know what's really sad is watching that armored column go by yesterday and watching those boys sitting up there on top, heading off. Many of them are not coming back, and thinking all of this for this giant dick measuring contest between two world leaders. It's not about Ukraine. Ukraine is the football in this contest. But it's not one of the teams. The teams are the West and Russia. And these guys, they go to their summits and they sail their yachts and fly their jets around. And it's those boys on top of that tank that are not going home to their mothers because of it. Vladimir Putin's not going to lose any kids, and it's not going to lose any sleep over the kids that don't go home. And somebody like that, it is a profanity that somebody like that can hold a leadership position for 30 years in a country like Russia.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm probably going to disappear after this because I'm sitting in a hotel that's owned by one of those oligarchs that got sanctioned, and I'm sure they're listening to every word. So the FSB is probably going to show up at my door here any minute.
Yeah.
And that is a question I had for you. You know, technically, you know, I've been a journalist for as long as Vladimir Putin's been in power. But you know, we're supposed to be sacrosanct, right? We're there to report. We're non-combatants. They're supposed to let you out. What about your safety? I mean, you know, you're kind of freelance. You're there for yourself. And Newsmax. I mean, are you concerned at all about your safety personally? I mean, obviously you're in a war zone, and there's that end. But
yeah, but you know, I've been doing this for 20 years. And as we used to say in the military, you can hang around the barbershop long enough and you might get a haircut.
Yeah.
And I realize that the statistics could catch up with me doing this job if I get lazy or let comfort or fear drive motivate my thinking and my actions. And so I have this sort of personal policy that I won't be motivated by comfort, fear, or pride. And I'm a very cautious person, and I don't have anything to prove to anybody. I'm seeing a lot of journalists here in Ukraine this time who are young and they're ambitious and they do have something to prove to somebody, and so they're desperate to get out somewhere where they need to wear a flak vest.
Yeah.
And I'm just not that guy anymore. I can do my job. I can get the footage that I need. And I'm going to take the minimum amount of risk to do that. Now, I'm more of kind of a safety third person also in that, you know, I am a man of strong Christian faith. I know that God numbers my days, and when my time comes, and it could be in my bathtub, or it could be, you know, charging into a hail of bullets. Personally, I'd rather the latter, you know, honestly. And my family all knows. I've told them if I ever don't come home from one of these trips, you can know beyond a shadow of a doubt that I died doing what I was made to do, what I wanted to do, what I love doing. And it doesn't get any better than that.
Right.
Now, I have big plans to see my grandkids and grow up and to outlive my wife by at least a day, just to say I won. But but at the same time, there's no way I want to arrive at the end of my life in a perfectly preserved body that's never been off the sidewalk.
Yeah.
I want to come skidding in sideways, all burned out, all used up, and saying that was quite a ride, you know? And I think I've done that. I was actually praying about this last night and saying, Lord, if I don't come home from this trip, there's no way I could ever have a complaint. I can't complain about the life I've been given. And I've been able to see and do so much in the last 20 years doing this job that if I die today, I die a happy man. I got no complaints. I got no regrets. Somebody asked a question that I wanted to answer over here. Eric Wingren.
Eric talked about it. I told Eric to look earlier in the show, but you go ahead and cover his question about Ukrainian fighting.
Yeah, he says, do you have an impression of the Ukrainian fighting man? I saw somebody suggest today that they might not be competent to operate a javelin. Well, I mean, my first question would be, how competent are you to operate a javelin? You know, a javelin is a sophisticated piece of equipment that requires training, but it doesn't take a rocket scientist to operate.
The book isn't very thick for a javelin to shoot it. It's just not very thick.
No, I mean, no. And, you know,
the instructions are on the side. I mean,
yeah, exactly. Right. And they're in pictures. They're like graphic, you know, so it's like a cartoon.
I hate to interrupt, but I actually had somebody who was trained on them tell me he can train anybody to fire one of these things in about 30 minutes.
Yeah.
They're sophisticated, but they're not hard to use.
Sure. And we've done it. We've trained. I mean, they make these things to be grunt proof, right?
E4s are using them.
I want to mention one thing. Again, when you have experience in combat zones, you understand things. And there is a balance between, hey, there's always time for safety, and there's always time for safety. You know, you know how to mitigate the risk. One thing that's tough though to do when you're where you're at, and even within your high skill level of doing it well and minimizing risk, is you can't be in all the places that you want to be. So
Right.
where you're not able to get to, that you're like, damn, I wish I could get over there, but it's just not possible.
I mean, that's just it. Anymore, there's different kinds of journalism, and the kind that I'm doing right now is pretty distasteful to me because what we're doing, the live broadcasting. Here I am in Ukraine, and there's stuff happening, and
Right.
here's what it is. And to do that, you've got to have certain elements like a good internet connection, right? And so the places where I prefer to be, where things are actually blowing up, typically don't have a good internet connection. So I can't do the journalism on this trip that I would love to be doing because I've got to babysit the live view and go on camera every 30 minutes doing the talking head bit. I get it. I mean, I have a policy. If you pay me, I'll work for you. I'll do what you ask. So they're paying me and I'm doing what they want me to do. And I'm not, there will always be another conflict tomorrow.
Right.
That's one thing I've learned in this war. One of the things about being a war correspondent is you'll always have job security. Wars and disasters you'll always have with you. So I'm not worried about, I'm going to miss it. That's the rookie mistake, right? That I see these rookies running around here with their hair on fire, going, "Oh, we got to get out there where the things are going." And I'm like,
Yep.
Look, it's on Telegram. Look, it's on Twitter. I mean, everybody and their dog has an iPhone now. Just wait 10 minutes. It'll be on Twitter. You can use it from there. I can actually do better overall reporting on the situation in a country the size of Texas by staying in this luxury hotel in downtown Kyiv and sitting here with TweetDeck and combing through Twitter and seeing what's going on. It's a new world, It's not what I prefer, but it's what I'm being paid to do right now. So it's what I'm doing.
One of the true signs of someone who's a rookie, and I think you'll appreciate this, that I see is when you go to get on a helicopter, is the person trotting with their head down, because like we all know, right? You're like, a helicopter is not going to cut their head off, man. And by the way,
what's worse is when they get off the helicopter and turn and run right for the tail rotor.
Yeah,
I've actually had to save some people from doing that.
Yeah,
CNN would be minus a couple reporters if it wasn't for me.
If they jump in that back right seat on the Black Hawk when all the other seats are up, and you're like, you know what? Yeah, you sit there.
Go ahead,
Have fun.
And they're thinking, I got the good view, and you're like, Go ahead.
Is there any room? And I know this, I'm kind of stealing Patrick's question. Is there any room for allowance for Putin for like, hey, I'm trying to run a country here, and we need to stabilize our connection to the ocean on our south, western border. And, I believe that there's something to gain, and there are Russians there. Is there any room for any of that stuff at all?
Yes, if you go back and read Putin's blog post that he wrote back in 2000, back in July of last year, he makes the case that, look, how would America feel if China came over and wooed Canada into joining its military alliance against the United States? You'd have a problem with that. And that's what I have a problem with Ukraine. I get it. I understand that. But it still doesn't give you the right to roll your tanks in here, jackass. And so, yes, there's a point to be made. And I think his point is, from his point of view, he sees NATO as an existential threat to Russia. From our point of view, we're like, what are you talking about, dude? Like, NATO's not plotting to take over Russia. We're not plotting to nuke Russia anytime soon. I mean, that was he's stuck in the 1980s, right? NATO is all about transgender rights and soy milk and solar energy and all that BS. So, if he just had stayed to himself in Russia, NATO probably would have collapsed under the weight of its own rot in the next 10 years. But instead, he just gave NATO a huge shot in the arm. His worry about Ukraine wanting to join NATO has become a self-fulfilling prophecy because of what he's done. There's not a person in Ukraine right now that doesn't want to join NATO. Everybody wants to join NATO.
You
Probably
think
for
we'll
good
see-
reason.
You think we'll see a Title V balling of the fist and coming after Russia if this lasts more than a month?
No.
Okay.
I don't. And I think his calculation is that they won't. The problem he runs into is something called spring and the thaw. If you ever get the chance to walk across a freshly plowed field in Ukraine, don't, because you'll be a foot taller when you come out the other side, and you'll never get that crap off your shoes.
Oh yeah.
They have the most rich, dark loam, just clay. It's amazing. And you try to drive a tank through that stuff after the thaw, and your tank is maybe not coming out the other side. And your tank retriever is maybe not coming out the other side. And your tank retriever is probably not coming out the other side. I mean, you might as well just leave it there.
Yeah.
So
You don't need to travel
that's his window is closing.
Yeah, really fast. Yeah.
He knew
Well,
that.
You know, you have tank retrievers because tanks have a life. It's not very long, like a combat life of a tank before. And I'm not talking about getting shot. I'm talking about stuff just falling apart.
Maintenance.
They're not meant to be out forever like that.
Right.
Pat, you got anything?
No, I think I mean I know we're running up on time, and just really appreciate your coming out and doing this with us. When Pete gave me the opportunity, I was really excited. I've been an investigative journalist all my career, and the war correspondence with the guys I looked up to. So it's nice to talk to a guy that's on the front line.
Well, I'm glad to get an opportunity to do it. It really is a privilege to do this job. And, to have a front row seat to the history for now 20 years, it gets richer as it goes along, because now I have the wisdom of experience of, understanding previous conflicts and being able to see the differences and everything in each one. It's a fascinating job. And when I get too old to do it, I can sit home and write about it for the rest of my days. And I look forward to those. I look forward to that.
My last simple question for
My
you.
wife doesn't look forward to that, but I look forward to it.
My last simple question, and I love the normalcy of war. 'Cause like you said, you got people going to the store to buy bread. What's the most normal thing you're going to do with the rest of your day to day outside of your room? Like, what are you going to go do that you're like, how can it be that he's doing this right now?
They've got these territorial defense units, these militias, for lack of a better term, that are now mobilizing. And I asked that guy last night if any of those units had seen combat. He said, "Oh yeah, they're taking out tanks." And these are just regular Joes that are getting together and get Bubba and Willie and get your gun and let's go. And they are proving themselves to be lethal. So we're going to go out and talk to some of them. There are some Americans here that I'm familiar with that are training them on medical stuff, and so we'll go see that. And we're keeping a real close eye on the Russian troop movements, because we got to get out of this city before they encircle it. So we've made some contingency plans for that. Otherwise, I'm going to have to just surrender to the Russians and try to run my empire from Siberia for the rest of my life. I'd rather not do that.
Okay. All right. I'm going to sign off here. Stand by for 1 second.